Welcome and thank you for joining our webinar today, Windows Server Security, which events to monitor and why, featuring guest speaker, IT and Windows security expert, Russell Smith. You're also joined by BeyondTrust product manager, Jason Silva, who will run us through a brief overview of BeyondTrust PowerBroker for Windows after Russell's portion, so please stick around for that. My name is Sarah, your webinar host today. A kind reminder to please submit your questions via the chat box in the GoToMeeting console anytime throughout the webinar, and we'll cover your questions at the end during our Q&A time. Also, today's session is being recorded. You will receive a follow-up email containing links to the recording and the slides shown here today within 1 to 2 business days from now. The slides can also be immediately downloaded via the handout section in the GoToWebinar console. At this point, let's hand it on over to Russell Smith, who will jump right into his presentation. Russell, welcome aboard and take it away.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome everybody to this session on Windows Event Log Monitoring. So before I start, I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about me. So my name's Russell Smith and I'm an independent IT consultant and I specialize in management and security of Windows Server. As you can see on the screen there, I also contribute to various different sites. I'm a regular blogger over at the Petri IT Knowledge Base, and I've got a couple of courses on Pluralsight if you're interested in Azure and the cloud. And you'll also find stuff there, of course, on BeyondTrust site and in the archives over at the Windows IT Professional websites. I've also got a book out at the moment, handily about the subject of least privilege security. And right now that book is discounted, so it's a really great time to buy it. So it's down to just €10 there. Usually it costs about €30, but there's lots there, not just about overcoming the technical challenges of implementing least privilege in your organization, but also the political hurdles and how you can plan a project and successfully get user acceptance and management on your side for your least privileged projects. Okay. So I've got a question for you before I get into the technical details. So I'd like to know from everybody who's on the call today whether or not you already collect and monitor the Windows event logs from your servers in your organization. So if you have a look on the GoToMeeting console, you'll see a little hands up icon, and I'd just like to see a raise of hands to get an idea of how many of you actually do that right now. So I'll just give you 10-15 seconds to do that. I can already see some hands going up there. Okay, so some of you are, but not many as it stands right now. Okay, that's great, thanks. So, there are two types of auditing in Windows Server. And of course, in order to generate events and the particular events that you want, you can configure auditing, and if you have a look on the screen there, you can see what is known as legacy auditing in Windows. So you've got various categories there which you can basically turn on or off for failure or success auditing. Now these settings are legacy auditing settings. They are still available in the latest versions of Windows, but they're there really for just backwards compatibility really, but you can still use them of course, but the problem with these legacy settings is that they can be quite noisy. So when you turn them on, you generate lots and lots of information in your event logs. So Microsoft's answer to that was a new auditing system called Advanced Audit Policy. And that is the system that you should use if you have a version of Windows Server that supports it. But you do have to choose. You can't use the legacy auditing and the advanced audit policy at the same time. So you need to choose which of those systems you're going to use. So how does the advanced audit policy differ from legacy auditing? So what you get are 9 categories that roughly are equivalent to the legacy auditing controls that you saw in the screenshot before. But those 9 categories are divided into further subcategories. So some of them just have 3 or 4 subcategories, some of them more, but the idea of these subcategories is to give you finer control over what is actually logged into your Windows event logs, because too much information, too much noise makes it very hard to do something useful with that information. So it's about more granular control. So if you have a look at the slide, you can see that I've lined up the legacy auditing controls with the new advanced audits policy names, and they're more or less equivalent. So you can see, for instance, that in legacy auditing we have audit account management, and in an advanced audit policy it's just called advanced management. Now there are 2 there that you can see I've highlighted with bold text under advanced audit policy name. I've highlighted detailed tracking because it's a little bit different from its legacy control name, so that is audit process tracking, and there is an extra category there under advanced audit policy called global object access auditing, and I'll explain what that is in a few minutes. So now on the screen you can see that in the local policy the advanced audit settings have their own folder, if you like. They're not under local policies like the legacy audit controls, and you can see that the 9 categories are on the left. You can't see all of the categories there because we need to scroll down a bit, can't do that in the screenshot, but you can see that the account management category is further then divided into 6 subcategories which you can individually configure, and you can't do that with legacy auditing. So that's what it looks like when you open up advanced auditing in policy. So I mentioned global object access auditing. So exactly what is that? So before Windows Server 2008, you basically needed to, if you wanted to audit access to the file system or the registry, you needed to go to each place, let's say in the file system that you wanted to turn on auditing, and you needed to manually configure in the security access control list an entry for what kind of access you wanted to audit on that object. And you needed to go through the file system and you needed to do that manually. But what global object access does is give you a per machine or per computer control so that you can switch on file or registry auditing for that device rather than having to set the configuration manually in an access control list for each item. So it just makes the auditing of the file and registry system, the configuration of that auditing, a bit more simple. So in Windows 2008, Global Object Access was introduced, but it was only in the R2 version of Windows 2008 that we got group policy control. So basically, you could configure that only through the command line before, and we also get in R2 Windows 2008 we also get the ability to use expression-based policy where we can switch on the, for instance, file auditing for the entire system, but make it more specific in terms of what we actually want to put into the event log, what information we want to capture. But in order to use expression-based policy with global object access auditing, you need to have dynamic access control set up on your system. So that might be a little bit more complicated to achieve. So if you have a look at the screenshot here, you can see what switching on Global Object Access Auditing looks like. It's very simple. If you don't want to add any conditions, and you just choose the security principle you want to audit and what kind of events you want to audit, and that's it. And you click OK, and it's done for the entire computer. You don't need to fiddle around with access control lists at all. So, as I said, like Global Object Access, Advanced Audit Policy was first introduced in Windows Server 2008. You don't get any group policy control, so you have to configure it through the Audit Pol command line tool. But if you're on Windows Server 2008 R2 or above, you can configure Advanced Audit Policy using group policy. If you decide that you want to use advanced auditing and not the legacy auditing controls, then you need to enable that in group policy. And I've put on the screen there the exact setting. So it's called Audit Force Audit Policy Subcategory, and you basically need to enable that to override the default setting, which is the legacy auditing controls. And that is what you should do if you have access to that on the Windows, on the version of Windows Server that you are using. So once you've got auditing set up and you've got all the information coming into your event logs, what is it that you actually need to collect and what do you need to be looking at? So I've put on the screen the kind of events here that you should think about collecting. As you can see, I've just put rather limited selection of events here. Of course, there might be other things that you want to add, but these are probably the things that are most important. And you should collect events that will indicate some kind of change, failure, or problem on your servers. So, for example, we've got Windows Firewall. And there you might want to collect the firewall add, the firewall change, the firewall rule deleted, and the firewall fail to load group policy events, for example, because they will indicate some kind of change or failure or problem connected to Windows Firewall, which could obviously affect the security of your server. And let me give you another example, for instance, Windows Defender. So you might want to log events like a scan that failed, or of course malware was detected, or that Windows Defender failed to update the signatures on the device. So you should go through these categories and have a look at those events, what events are actually available, and what might indicate a change, failure, or a problem with your server. So let's have a look in a little bit more detail at some events. And you can see on the screen here that I've got 5 different events there for application crashes. And these events, of course, might, not necessarily, but might indicate a problem. So, for instance, an application hang, or maybe Windows error reporting, or something like this. If these things get logged, it might indicate that something is not quite right with your server. What else have we got? Account usage. So any of these events might indicate a problem. So an account lockout, or any account lockout, might indicate you've got an issue. What else? Adding users to a privileged group, okay, especially if it's a privileged domain group. What exactly is going on there? Did that person have permission to be added to that group? And of course, anything connected around failed account logons, successful user account login. Of course, this is a bit more difficult to monitor because you're going to get literally thousands of events probably for this, but again, you need to think about exactly which users should be logging on to where, and are they allowed to do that? Do they have permission to do that? Is it normal behavior for your environments? Of course, clearing the event logs. A hacker might try to hide his tracks by clearing the event logs. Of course, if you're not watching your events at all, then you may never notice this happen. But you can forward your events. I'll talk about that in a minute. So even if the events do get cleared, you've hopefully got them somewhere on another server where you can have a look to see what was going on before the events were cleared. And of course, any change to the audit policy that you set up, again, might be an indication that a hacker has got access to your system somehow and is trying to change the policy so that you don't notice what they are doing on your systems. Remote desktop logon. Okay, this is why have I put this here? Because in a production environment, especially when it's connected to domain controllers, nobody should be logging on to a domain controller using remote desktop if you follow security best practices. Now, how you securely manage a domain controller, that's a whole other topic that we don't have time to discuss today, but remote desktop is not the way to do it. So if you see that anybody is logging on to a domain controller using remote desktop, again, that might be an indication that either somebody is just not doing what they should be doing, or that some kind of malicious activity is going on. So you get the idea about what you should be looking for and some more detail about some of the events I listed there. So I mentioned event forwarding. So this is really useful. So you've got, let's say, just 2 or 3 servers. It's not really a problem maybe to manually look at what's going on in each event log on those servers. But when you've got more servers, hundreds or maybe thousands, that then becomes a problem. So when Windows event forwarding, basically this uses a standard for sending events securely from one place to another using Windows Remote Management. And all you need to do on your devices is to make sure that Windows Remote Management is enabled on the devices from which you want to collect events. And then all you need to do is make sure on the source PC is that the collector, so the device that is going to collect your events, make sure that machine account is added to the event log readers group on that device. And then you come over to the collector and you configure a subscription on the collector which will pull the event log from your source or your source PCs. So it's really, really simple, really easy to do, and I'll show you a little bit of how to configure a subscription towards the end of this demo. What else have I got there? So another important note is that the security log on DCs has extra security on it, and you need to do a little bit more than just add the collector's computer account to the event log readers group. So on a DC, if you want to collect the security event log, you will need to modify the channel access permissions on the security event log to add the network service account. So you can see the permissions on the security event log by issuing the first command that you can see on the screen there. That will just show you the current permissions, and then you need to modify the security descriptor. Unfortunately, it's a little bit complicated, as you can see there, but you see that the network service account has a security identifier, so a SID of S1520. And I've just appended that to the string, which the first command gave me, and I use that to basically change that security identifier to give the network service account access to the security logs on a DC. So it's pretty easy to do. It looks a bit scary, but it is really easy to do. Okay, so I want to come across now and give you a bit of a demo and show you Windows event forwarding in action, and how you can sort and view that information once you've all got it collected into a central repository, if you like. So just give me 1 second while I swap over to my VM. Hopefully it's still running there in the background. Just give a second for the screen to update. So now you can see this is Event Viewer, what you can see here. I've got a very simple lab set up. I've got a domain controller and I've got a one member server. And I am now on the member server. It's called Server 1. And I'm using this to collect event logs, basically from my domain controller, because that's the only other device I have in this network. But it just gives you the idea. So what you can see on the screen here is the bog standard event viewer. And I have one subscription set up on this device for DC1. Now to create a new subscription, you just basically right-click on subscriptions and go create subscription. I have one already set up here, so I'm just going to show you the properties of that subscription. And basically this is what it looks like. So you just have to give the subscription a name, which I did at the top, DC1, and we're going to pull the events from the server, so it's collector initiated, and you just select the computers from which you want to pull event logs. It can be one or more computers. Here it's just one computer, and you can see the very not very convenient name of my domain controller in the list there. And that's it. And then all I have to do is decide which events I want to collect. So I can choose there by level. So you can see that I'm collecting all of the event levels, it doesn't matter. And which event logs do I actually want to collect? So for this subscription, I've just selected the 4 main Windows event logs. Of course, I could select a lot more. If I expanded this, they're all there. You've got loads and loads of stuff there that you could actually collect. But for the time being, I'm just selecting the main ones there. And then you can filter this down to really target exactly what information you want to collect. And of course, you can create more than one subscription, which is important to note. Here I'm keeping it simple. I'm going to collect all events basically. But I can filter it and just collect particular event IDs. I can filter by keyword or user or even computer if I have more than one computer in the subscription. So it's really easy to set up a subscription here. Once you've configured all of that, how you want the subscription to look, that is actually also represented in text form, if you like. So you can manually edit this query and you can copy it to another place, or it might just be convenient for whatever reason to have it in a slightly different form there. Okay, so I'm going to cancel out of that. And you can see here my destination log. Where am I going to put these forwarded events? And there's already a log there called forwarded events. So I just put them there. Okay, I'm just dumping everything into that one log at the moment with no problem. So if I come over to Windows Logs, I can see forwarded events. And you can see now this is everything from my domain controller. And you can see there that this awkward domain controller name, and I've had that switched on maybe now for a couple of days, so there's plenty of stuff there. But, well, okay, so I've got all these events now in the forwarded events log folder. Well, what am I going to do with it? How do I monitor it so that I can see important information to me? Of course, one way is to really filter down the subscription to just the information you want. But another way is to use custom views. So I can create any number of custom views on an event log. And I've already created a couple here. So if I want to create a custom view, I just right-click on the log I want to create a custom view for, create custom view. And it gives me a very similar screen that we saw for the subscription. So you just need to define what kind of events, and you can add filters as much as you like, basically, to get honed down to exactly the information that you're looking for. let's have a couple look at a couple of custom views on the forwarded events log that I've already set up. So if I click on this and I come down to properties, you can see that I have called this DC1, so my DC, and remote desktop access. If you remember back to the slide deck, I showed you some remote desktop access events that I want to search for. I want to see, is anybody logging on to my DC using remote desktop access, because they shouldn't be. So let's have a look at that filter. You can see it there in an XML form. I'll go back to the slides later and show you that in a bigger print so you can see what it looks like in XML form. And I can't switch back to that because I actually pasted that in manually. If I click yes on that, that will disappear. Okay, everything's disappeared now, so that wasn't very clever of me. So I'm going to go back to this and I'll show you. If I come back to the slides, if I come back to this slide, this was actually the information that I had in there, and all I did was copy and paste it into that XML view. So if I do that, just have to excuse me a minute, I'll just come out of that view, and I'll copy that information out. If I come back to my VM, it's going to let me paste it in. Not going to let it paste me in. Okay, so I'll try that again. Maybe it's just a display issue. Come back again, let's edit the filter. Ah, okay, so let's put that information back in. So this is what you see in the slide basically. So if I come to this view now, and you can see that somebody has actually been logging onto the DC using remote desktop access. Not very often, but it has happened a couple of times in the last couple of days. So what does that mean? Well, that's actually me logging onto that DC. So I know who that is, but we have that information there. It's very targeted. I can see exactly what's happening in that custom view. I'm just going to come back to the slides for a minute. You just give me a second. So now you can see the filter there that we use for remote desktop, but also parse the hash. So this is basically a technique that hackers use to jump from one machine to the other without ever actually having to know a username and password. And it's a very common attack. And in order to detect is that happening on your device, you can see a couple of events here that you should look for: success and failure. So here I have a couple of filters already set up. This one is for parse the hash detection success. So if you have a look there, you can see the event ID 4624 that was on the previous slide, and there is other information that I'm looking for to pull out that event in the custom views, the logon type and the target username, anonymous logon for instance. And it looks pretty much the same for failure, apart from the event ID changes to 4625. If I go back, you can see success is 4624 and for failure it's 4625, and that's the only thing that changes. So if I come back to my VM, you can see that I've got a couple of custom views there. And if I come down to the properties and I click on edit filter, you can see that information there in the XML panel. So you might be asking yourself, well, how did Russell write this filter? It all looks incredibly complicated. And of course it is a little bit complicated when you look at it, but you don't need to write these filters yourself. You can edit them yourself, and you can take these filters from the slide deck if you want to use them. But how did I create them? Basically, if I come, for instance, I'll cancel out of that, to forwarded events, and I'm going to create a new custom view, and I just set whatever I want here, blah, 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 I don't know, 4624, let's say. I can put in a keyword there, let's just select a computer instead of a keyword, let's say DC1. Once I've configured all that information in the filter tab, I can come over to XML and you see that filter is already written for me. So it's really not difficult, and if I want to edit it manually, I have to click this box, just put a check there. But that does mean once I check to edit this query manually, I won't be able to use the filter tab, as you saw when I messed up the demo a few minutes ago. You basically use one or the other, you can't use both. So if I cancel out of that, and you can see now on my custom view here for DC1 pass the hash success, there are no events. Now this is a good thing because I don't want to see any potential pass the hash attempts on my DC, and hopefully failure is also completely empty. I don't see anything there, again because it's very targeted, no information there that I don't need, and all of that stuff is there. So what else can you do with these custom event views? You can also attach a task to them. So for instance, you can just select it from here, attach task to this custom view, and it doesn't do very much apart from it allows you to run a program or a script. So if this event custom view on this event log becomes populated, and I just click through the wizard here, you can start an action. At the moment, only starting the program is supported. The other features have been deprecated, so you shouldn't use them. But it basically allows you to start a program or script and call any arguments that you want, of course, so that you can alert some other system or send an email or do whatever it is that you want to do. So I could set up an alert if this DC1 pass the hash failure custom view gets populated with any kind of event, because obviously that indicates a problem with my domain controller. Okay. So you can see that the forwarding is very simple to set up, and the custom views are very useful in that you can really target and find what information it is that you're looking for. Okay, so I hope that gives you an idea of what you should be looking for in the event logs. So if you have a look at the categories back in the slide deck that I gave you, the areas that you should be looking at, and any change, problem or failure connected with those categories could indicate a problem. So you get your events off of your servers using forwarding, and you can use custom views to really understand what is going on there and be potentially even alerted if events happen that are probably undesirable in your environment. Okay, so now I'm going to hand over to Jason from BeyondTrust, if he's there.
Oh, okay, good. I was on mute and I couldn't come off. All right, thank you so much, Russell. As with anything we talk about security, one of the things that comes up is the people that are trying to do this oftentimes have administrative access. So what I'm going to run through today somewhat quickly is a product called PowerBroker for Windows, and the idea around it is pretty simple. Your users, whether they log on to a client OS or they log on to a server or they're engineering or IT or Exchange admins, it doesn't much matter. They don't actually have to have administrative access. But when you just drop those rights, granted your security, it goes way up, but your operation, your productivity can go way down because a lot of things don't work anymore. So what we need is an application like PowerBroker for Windows here that'll say, all right, if Jason runs a certain application or does a certain task, let's allow that task to go through properly. Let's allow it to run with the rights it needs without giving Jason those actual rights. Or in some cases, I actually may need to run something as a secondary, like an ADM user, but I still don't want to give my people, my users, the actual credentials for real privileged accounts. I only want to allow them to have this access kind of as needed, but I also don't want it to get in the way. So most of it is very seamless. I don't need to prompt anyone with messaging. Again, I don't need to change ACLs. I don't need to make somebody a temporary admin. And that's kind of what I'm going to go through today as we go through this this little demo here. PowerBroker for Windows, it is patented technology. The idea of logging in as a standard user, and when that user runs an application, adjusting the security token of the application, we invented it. We have the patent on that. There's a lot of centralized reporting. That reporting does include events. So Russell was going through a lot of the events that you should use. Windows event log forwarding, if you still want to use that, that is absolutely fine. I won't get in the way of that. I can complement it. I can use it in unison as well. Or you can just use PowerBroker for Windows and its reporting backend to track those same events as well. Take action, show an email, that kind of thing. The Windows events track alongside of other types of events. You know, when are people trying to run things that normally require admin rights? When are they running things that we've already said are okay? You just want to know that the rules in place that you might have are working properly. When is somebody maybe doing something considered suspicious or lateral movement? You know, there's some rules in place for that as well. So when you combine those types of activities with straight Windows event logging, you really paint a good picture of what might be going on some of these boxes, or at the very least, where you want to focus your attention. You're certainly even a company with a couple of hundred machines or a couple of thousand machines. We don't have time to look at everybody and micromanage, is something bad happening here? But if I can combine this data and show you what the most likely machines you should take a look at are, it does make it a lot easier to really keep up and date on these kind of things. I mentioned some of this. You know, the core functionality is just to elevate privileges on applications, enforcing these privileges, basically tracking what's actually being done on these systems, whether it be application related, Windows event related, it doesn't matter, and even monitoring some of these sessions. You may choose to actually take screenshots of certain times when you allow something. We can also track vulnerable applications, for instance. So if you need to allow an application to run, even if it is, excuse me a second, even if it is known to be vulnerable, you may want to record what that application is. Or if you elevate something where they have access to programs and features, right? That's, again, something that you're going to want to maybe take a look at deeper after the fact, right? So let me get into it real quick. Again, on this box, it happens to be a Windows 10 box. It could have been Windows 2016, Windows 7, doesn't really matter. It's a Windows box. I'm a standard user, right? I'm just logged in as an average everyday person, but some of the things that I need to do may and will require some kind of elevated access. So something as simple as data sources. I can open it just fine, but when I go and try to create a system data source, well, I can't do that. Obviously, I'm a standard user, right? I need more access to be able to do this. Again, I don't want to give the user admin rights so they can go create data sources. I want to give them the ability to do that function without actually exposing too much and opening up too much that goes on with this as well. Same thing with process monitor. That won't even open without admin rights. But like I mentioned, all it really is a matter of creating policy or creating rules. And there are multiple ways you can create these rules manually, kind of like what Russell was doing when he was showing you the properties of the subscriptions. If you know how to go in and do that, go ahead, go and do it. If you need a little kind of the wizard-driven sort of approach, that's fine too. We have multiple ways to know what kind of things need to be elevated. Here, I already have the rules created for me. I'm just going to go ahead and turn them on. If you want to manage these rules by group policy, it is a group policy extension. If any of you are familiar with group policy preferences, well, we made those too. Microsoft bought that from us many, many years ago now, but some of that technology still exists in our product that extends group policy as well. This model that I'm using is sort of a web service model. My access isn't to group policy to see what rules exist, but rather it's to our back-end database, the same place I'll show you where I actually go and see the Windows events I want to track or see the application launches I want to track as well. It's just a SQL database, IAS fronting kind of thing, so it works very well. There's even an EPO model where this little UI I'm looking at when I save my rules, it actually saves into McAfee's EPO. So multiple ways to say, you know, how do I want to manage the overall sort of system here. But now that these exist, I'll ask the client down here to go ask, is there anything new? And there will be because, well, I just turned on 2 rules that were previously shut off. Let that go through real quick. Good, that's done there. So the same thing I just did. Nothing fancy. I'm not an admin right now, but this application has now been granted the rights it needs to function properly. It's still running as the logged on user. That logged on user is not an admin now. There's nothing different about the ACL behind the scenes here. I've just allowed these things to happen because in this person's day-to-day role, these are examples of things that should be allowed to run. But I mentioned there's more to it than just elevating or even denying application, because there is built-in application control as well. That's these privileged identity rules. I want to elevate, force an application to run as a standard user, flat out deny the application. These risk compliance rules is what I mentioned. Do I want to track maybe individual applications or full directories if anything launches out of there that has some level of vulnerability, whether it be a high risk, its PCI score is high? What do I want to happen after the fact if I know that an application is vulnerable? Do I just want to log that it exists and it's being used? Maybe it's kind of outside of our SLA for patching things. Maybe the risk is too great. If I'm on a server especially, I'm certainly not going to allow a vulnerable web browser to run, for instance, if a web browser is even allowed on that server in general. File integrity. And then we, of course, have these event monitoring rules here. I grabbed a couple of them based on some of the slides from that Russell will show, and same kind of thing. What are some of the events that I want to track? Now, again, this is a little bit different than Windows Event Log Forwarding because it doesn't use that built-in WinRM that Windows Event Log Forwarding is going to use, but it also won't get in the way of it if you choose to use that as well. If you want to see what both do, play around with both methods, go for it. It's fine. It's absolutely okay. So 4624 actually happens quite a bit in my lab here. So I'll show some additional tracking around that as well. I think 4638 is another one that kind of comes up a lot. But it's just a matter of saying, look, if these events happens on these managed clients, these PowerBroker for Windows managed clients, I need to know about it. I need to centralize those up as well. And that's what happens, right? So if I jump over into what we call Beyond Insight, log back into this guy. Beyond Insight comes with PowerBroker for Windows. It's a way to centralize these things. But here again, it's more than saying, oh, hey, just show me when an application ran. This guy will actually help you build out those rules. I mentioned earlier, that's great. I had a couple of rules kind of disabled but ready to go. If you didn't have these rules already ready, well, how would you know what kind of things to actually build out? Well, Beyond Insight will tell you, hey, you know what? On these machines, these users, they ran applications and, hey, they prompted for UAC. Or if you don't have UAC turned on, they prompted for rights above and beyond what a standard user would have. And then you just choose whether or not to create policy for those as well. Like I said, I have some machines that have 4624 detected. If I take a look at what makes this little rule to show out or call out that 4624, 4634 are actually called, it's pretty simple. I'm just using, hey, if this Windows event from this log actually occur, I could add in, if I didn't want to do this one-for-one, maybe I wanted to see 4624 and 4625. Show me the machines that show both of those events. I would just add another one underneath this, no problem. In this case, I'm just showing the machines that contain this event, but I could also generate myself an email. And I could tell it, you know what, every 6 hours or every 12 hours, whatever it might be, I need you to send me an email, sort of a digest of all the times within that time frame you saw these events occur. Makes it a little bit easier, so I don't need to be looking at 16 events over maybe even a short period of time. Maybe I won't have time to react that fast to some things. So just show me over time, over even the course of a full day, when it happened. I'll take a look at it and I'll just subscribe to it and come in the morning and see when these things have happened as well. So it's very easy to track those kind of things here as well. There's different views of it, right? If you want to actually go in and see it in a more report type of format, that's okay as well. There's multiple parts to what we talk about when we say Beyond Insight. One side is, hey, what's going on now, right? But as you'd expect, some of that data actually drops off. And then there's the other side of it where there is no natural purge to the data. It's a warehouse. It makes it very easy to show data over time. I mentioned it's more than just application launch kind of stuff. There's some scanning that comes with the product as well, so you can see things like what ports are open, what services are running. another alert you can do is show me when a particular service is seen to be stopped, right? And you can get to that really quick. There's a lateral movement one here. Like I mentioned, there are some things that most people should never be doing. You know, I wouldn't expect my users to be going into the route table. I wouldn't expect somebody in HR or marketing to go look at what other users on this box or in AD have admin rights. Those are just things that would be a little bit out of line for their day-to-day, right? So I'll track those things. And if they do tend to happen, I'll report them back into here. For Windows events, you know, I have a built-up report here. Again, like I mentioned, you can see it in sort of event format, onesie twosies kind of stuff. You can see it in a report format. But either way, you can get an idea of what kind of risk might you have. If I wanted to sort of just say, you know what, I just want to see when the security log, when these events happen from a security log point of view, you can do that as well. I don't have a lot of mixture up here. I only have 2 of these types of events from the application log. The rest certainly come from security. But you can, just like anything else, you should subscribe to these things. If you want to see them on a daily, weekly, whatever kind of basis, every Wednesday, then you can do that as well. Again, it's just another way to say, look, I have these computers. I'm supposed to secure them. The best way to secure them really is to remove their privileged rights. They don't need to log in as an admin. In very, very few circumstances, maybe that's true that they need admin rights. But in most circumstances, most scenarios, your users do not have to have admin rights. But when you just drop them, you need something to sort of pick up the slack from that. So combining security and operations is really what we're going to do here with PowerBroker Windows or PBW, however we're going to say it. Hope that kind of clears up a few things, or at least, you know, shows what we do in this space here. 7 million clients, can't be wrong, right, kind of thing. So if you have any questions, please let me know. But I think first what we'll do is something like this. Sarah, I believe you have another question.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. Okay, guys. So at this point, let's jump into our last poll. And here at BeyondTrust, we'd love to help you with your privileged access management needs. Would you like to schedule a personalized one-on-one demo with a BeyondTrust security engineer? Let us know. Select yes. And if you do select yes, somebody will be in contact with you to schedule your personalized demo and to chat a little bit more with you about any of our PAM solutions or even our Retina vulnerability management solution. So I'm going to leave this up. Let's dive into a couple of questions. Russell, these came in for you, so make sure you're off of mute and we'll dive right in. Russell, can the collector server be a standalone server, for example, not joined to a domain?
Yes, it can, but it's a little bit more complicated to set up because you need to do the authentication using certificates. So that will probably mean having to have your own PKI. Not necessarily, but that's usually kind of how it's done. So yes, but it's more complicated to configure.
Russell, this came in for you towards the end of your part of the presentation, and Fred was asking, why are you sending an email deprecated? Is there?
I'm not.
Okay.
So there were 3 options there for different kinds of tasks that you can perform if a custom view becomes populated with events. And there are 2 options there that are deprecated. One is sending an email, and one is, I can't remember what the other one was, but something. And what I mean is that using that kind of automated, this is going to send an email if the custom view gets populated, this is deprecated. If you want to create your own task to do whatever you want, whether it be send an email or do whatever, you can do it. It's not deprecated, if that makes sense. Just that kind of easy, now selecting this and we'll send an email is deprecated.
Russell, why would remote desktop not be used to administer a DC, and what are the acceptable alternatives?
Well, okay, that's a very big subject. Basically, the best way to, you shouldn't interactively log on to a domain controller. You shouldn't need to. And the alternatives are to use a workstation that's specifically secured and designated to administer domain controllers. And on this particular device, you can use the remote server administration tools, or you can use PowerShell remoting. so that you don't need to make that remote desktop logon onto a domain controller.
Russell, will the admin password be saved in all read-only domain controllers?
I don't know exactly which admin password they're referring to, or the domain administrator password, I guess. But no, I think is the answer to that.
Okay, Ollie, if you could clarify that.
Yeah, you can control basically what information is synchronized to read-only domain controllers, but I can clarify that.
Yeah, he said yes, domain password.
Okay, I can clarify that. Okay.
Okay, Russell, can Windows events be forwarded to security information and event management software?
Yes, because the method that Windows Server uses to forward events is an eventing standard, basically, and it can forward to most, I would say, solutions that collect event logs. Shouldn't be a problem. But obviously, you should check with that solution that it actually works.
Cool. Okay, Russell, last question that's in. If anybody else has any more questions, please submit them now. But I'm jumping into, I think, what might be the last question. Is it better to use a third-party auditing solution, Russell?
Well, probably yes. As you can see, I explained that, you should be looking at these areas, you should be looking at changes, failures, anything that indicates a problem. But you have to make those decisions, and you have to then still somehow view that information in a way that is useful. So for instance, as Jason was showing in his demo, Beyond Insight can help you to collect that information and to generate reports and to view that in a way that is more digestible than you can do with Windows Event Viewer. And any solution that is able to add intelligence. So what exactly is it that you should be looking for, and that solution can make those decisions for you. Of course, especially in large environments, anything that can make that process easier is probably going to be a better solution than the standard tools.
Jason, question for you. He'd like to know if PBW can be used for managing Azure.
No, it doesn't manage Azure. You could put devices in Azure and put PBW on them, but it doesn't do anything at like the hypervisor level. It's managed. It's installed to an OS and manage applications that are called from that OS.
Let's see, Russell. When you use event, I think this is for Russell. Charles, you'll have to clarify. When you use event forwarding from a client to the DC, does the client still keep events locally as well?
Yes, is the answer to that.
Okay, great. You're welcome, Charles. Okay, and then this is coming back in from Fred. He said, sorry for the earlier confusion. So why is sending an email a deprecated option?
Oh, I have no idea. No idea. Ask Microsoft, I'm sorry. I have no idea, sorry.
Awesome. And another question, yeah, you're welcome, Fred. Another question, what is the event retention period?
Well, you can set that in policy, and you can set it to basically, I'm not for this event retention, but the size of the event log is what you can set. So, you can just let it grow and grow and grow, or you can set a limit, and you can set it to archive if it gets to a certain limit, or you can set it to just clear, or whatever.
Alrighty, thanks everybody for submitting in your questions. Oh, let's see, we might have gotten one more come in. Nope, just a thanks. You're welcome, guys. Thanks for submitting your questions into Russell. A reminder that you will be receiving a follow-up email containing links to the recording and the slides shown here today within 1 to 2 business days from now, so make sure you have communications@beyondtrust.com whitelisted within your email provider so that you receive the follow-up without any interruption. So be on the lookout for that. And a huge thanks to Russell and Jason today. Thanks, guys. Always super informative and a pleasure working with you both.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody who attended live, and have a wonderful rest of your day. See you soon. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.